Welcome back to Prophecy Breakdown for some recent news that has received little coverage. I'm your host, Chop. This video will be brief but critically important. If you're familiar with eschatology at all, you know that there must be a Jewish temple present during the tribulation, since the Antichrist halts sacrifices and profanes that temple at the midpoint of the tribulation. The problem is that there hasn't been a temple since the last one was destroyed in 70 AD. Well, a group called the Temple Institute has been preparing for a new temple for so long that most in the West have forgotten about it. It's a topic that has generated a long list of unfulfilled predictions and hysteria among a certain segment of prophecy watchers. To be candid, temple talk turned into the boy crying wolf long ago. As someone who always tries to approach eschatology with intellectual and spiritual seriousness and caution, I've avoided discussion of the temple precisely because all the talk and preparations have come to nothing so many times. Temple watching had become a first cousin to date setting. That has changed. Temple action is starting to feel real. All the temple instruments have been created. Levites have been raised to adulthood as virgins, kept ceremonially clean according to Mosaic law, and are already fully trained as priests. Now, we've just learned that the Levitical choir, complete with orchestra, has been reestablished for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, and they've been rehearsing for a year. Land has been procured on the Mount of Olives that provides the appropriate view of the future temple site on the Temple Mount that is required for an altar. Before the temple can be built, the ashes of an unblemished red heifer must be used in a purification ritual.
One confounding yet eye-opening motive has escaped the headlines. In a recent speech, a Hamas spokesman blamed the Jews for bringing red cows to the Holy Land. The cows he's talking about at a secure, undisclosed location are these, red heifers, to be precise.
The Temple Institute now has 5 such heifers, approaching the required minimum age of 3 years. And word is they still meet the criteria. Many unblemished calves have been brought in over the decades, but that perfection rarely lasts until the age of 3, since the emergence of a single off-color hair or any other slight imperfection disqualifies the heifer. To have 5 of them still unblemished as they near the minimum age is amazing, and is yet another element that has the temple topic starting to feel real. Let's face it, when the U.S. media starts paying attention to something this esoteric and this connected to prophecy, we better start paying attention ourselves. The sacrifice and purification ceremony is planned for Passover 2024, according to Rabbi Yitzchak Mamo. That begins next month in late April 2024, so we'll keep a sharp eye on that to see if it materializes. Given all this recent movement, all that remains is a deal to allow permission for the temple to be built on the Temple Mount. Israel owns the land, but ceded custodial control to Muslims long ago in order to try to prevent more conflict and mayhem. As you can imagine, while this might be the last requirement, it would obviously be the most difficult by a mile, given that for a very long time, Jews haven't even been allowed to walk onto the Temple Mount and pray. To our human eyes, The idea that Muslims would go along with building a temple on the Mount appears about as likely as an August snowstorm in Texas. But we all know that God's prophecies come true, always. This temple will happen. The long-held assumption is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque would have to be torn down to make room for a new Jewish temple, a move that would literally spawn World War III. But I don't think that's necessary. Check out Revelation 11, verse 1.
Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. Revelation 11:1.
John is being instructed to measure the temple as it will exist in the tribulation. And it gets really interesting in verse 2.
But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city under foot for 42 months. Revelation 11:2.
Let's take a look at the Temple Mount as it exists right now. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, the area where the temple court would be in an unconstrained build of the temple. This area, however, has clearly been given to the Gentiles. But this area could definitely be used to build a temple without a court. Now let's move over to the Mount of Olives, the mountain where Jesus had his legendary end times conversation with Peter, James, John, and Andrew, a Q&A session which came to be known as the Olivet Discourse. You can study this critical conversation in Matthew 24 through 25, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Since the Temple Institute doesn't have access to the Temple Mount itself, they have purchased land on the Mount of Olives, which provides a perfect view of the future temple site on the Temple Mount. It is here that they have built the altar which will be used to sacrifice the red heifer, after which her ashes will be used in the purification ceremony that's necessary to begin construction of the temple. After thousands of years of waiting and decades of preparation for what seemed like a pipe dream, the Temple Institute is now like a race car driver on the starting line, brakes locked, engine revved, just waiting for that green light to signal go. If you've watched my other videos, you know I've long speculated that an agreement for the Jewish temple to be built on the Temple Mount may end up being the final sweetener in the 7-year deal that kicks off the tribulation. On that front, I'll do an episode soon on the status of the Grand Bargain, which is essentially an expansion of the Abraham Accords, as it continues to be negotiated, foolishly, without any input from either Israel or Iran, the two real players in the current war. The end times puzzle pieces continue to slide into place, so stay tuned. Until next time, chop out and Maranatha.